Hello everybody, my name is Happy and I'd like to welcome you to my History Reaction channel. Today we'll be taking a look at part 3 of the Great Northern War by Kings and Generals. This one is the Battle of Fraustadt. I have no idea how to pronounce that exactly. I am familiar with this particular battle in that it is often compared to the Battle of Cannae because of what Charles XII pulls off here. But that's about all I know about that battle, and I'm not really sure what else is going to be in this particular video. I have not seen any of this particular series before, and what little I know about the Great Northern War is from the Russian side of it, so I don't know a lot about, I know the broad strokes, but not a lot of detail about what's happening in Polish-Lithuanian and Livonian theater of this war. So I hope to learn a lot here, and I hope that I can add a little bit to it. I'm not sure how much I'll be able to do because Kings and Generals really do deep dives and they don't really leave a lot uncovered. When I add stuff in this series, it's probably going to be largely trivia or just general commentary because I just don't know that I can contribute a lot to these guys because these guys are that good at getting all the details, at least more than I know. So I can't contribute much when I don't know as much as they do. So anyway, I'm rambling. I will include a link to the original content in the description below. I highly encourage people to head over and show some support to Kings and Generals. These guys do spectacular work, and we want to encourage them to keep doing it. With that said, last time we ended with the Battle of Kliszów, 1702, I think it was, where they had just, at the very end of that, Charles XII was at, not Warsaw, but Kraków. Sorry, had a little brain melt there. He was just arriving at Kraków. His opponent in this, the Saxon leader, Augustus II, has just lost another battle and has retreated in an attempt to get more support for his war effort. So let's continue and see where this goes next.
In the beginning of the Great Northern War, it seemed that Sweden was isolated by its enemies that would soon win the conflict. However, by the middle of 1702, it proved to be anything but, as Charles XII, the soldier king of Sweden, had defeated all of his initial opponents in battle and was close to total domination. As the Swedish victories mounted, so did her enemies' eagerness to dismantle the empire. Just as the King of Poland, Augustus II, was licking his wounds after the defeat at Kliszów, the Russian bear came out of its winter slumber and began planning its next attack. The good news is that you don't need a time machine to experience historical epic warfare.
Okay.
The sponsor of this video, Epic War Thrones, is a free-to-play, massively multiplayer, real-time strategy game where
Since this is an older video, we're going to skip over the advertisement. I'll see you on the other side. I generally do that unless it's a relatively new video, in which case I'll let them play because the material is still relevant and I want these guys to get their message out. But since this is an older one, we're going to skip it. I'll see you on the other side. Bye-bye. And we're back.
Following the Battle of Kliszów, the Swedish army advanced towards Kraków, while Augustus fled to Sandomierz. The governor of Kraków was unwilling to surrender his city without a fight. However, he changed his mind after a Swedish display of force in front of the city walls. A couple of weeks later, a 12,000-strong Swedish army from Pomerania arrived in Kraków as well. Augustus, seeing the gravity of the situation, left Sandomierz with 4,000 cavalry and advanced towards Warsaw to retake it. He had hoped to call for another diet and gather military and financial support from the nobility. The diet did not go according to his plans though, as an increasing number of noblemen voiced their dissatisfaction with the fact that Augustus involved the Commonwealth in the war. Several noblemen even threatened to openly back Charles in the conflict.
Not good.
Growing more desperate, Augustus sent countless envoys to the Swedish king in the autumn of 1702. However, Charles would not accept any of the terms that were offered.
Why should he?
Fearing that all of his offers to Charles would go unanswered, Augustus begged for the aid of his liege via the electorate of Saxony, the Holy Roman Emperor. Leopold I acquiesced, though his motives were not as selfless as they seemed.
Okay, so yeah, the Habsburgs, can't miss them. They're heavily inbred by this period. And you can't miss a Habsburg by that Habsburg chin. So yeah, this is the Holy Roman Empire. Saxony's part of it. So even though Augustus II is a king, the Holy Roman Emperor is his liege. So he appeals to his liege for support.
As the treaty he offered Charles stipulated that Sweden and Poland would end all hostilities, and that all Saxon troops would leave to join the imperial army in the War of the Spanish Succession.
That's a good point. So there's a lot going on over in Western Europe at this time. The big thing being the War of Spanish Succession. So at this point, the rest of Europe is kind of watching or dealing with what's going on over there. They don't really have the time to deal with what's going on over here. And as you can see here, they kind of want these guys to knock it off and get over here, help us deal with this crisis.
King dismissed even this offer, as he was determined to defeat Augustus completely. By 1703, Augustus was forced to flee Warsaw again, while Charles continued consolidating his position in Poland. Although we have neglected this theatre of war for some time, it is time to return to Ingria and Estonia.
Right.
As Charles turned southwards after the Battle of Narva, Tsar Peter was given some much-needed time to reinforce and improve the Russian army. Boris Sheremetev, the only Russian commander to have escaped after the Battle of Narva, was given command over the Russian forces in the north. Small raids into Estonia and Ingria were conducted regularly during 1701, but they were not decisive by any means. The first serious attempt to probe the Swedish defences in the area was made in September, when Sheremetev led a 7,000-strong army into Estonia. However, von Schlippenbach intercepted the Russian advance with a 3 times smaller army and defeated Sheremetev at Reuj. Sheremetev made another attempt with a much larger army under him and advanced into Estonia again in January 1702. Schlippenbach, this time outnumbered 6-1, gave battle at Erastve and was forced to retreat after sustaining heavy casualties. After Erastve, the Russians faced almost no significant opposition in the area and were able to advance deep into Ingria. In the autumn of 1702, the main Russian army, under the command of Peter himself, reached the Swedish fort of Nöteborg. As the Russians had lost all of their artillery at the Battle of Narva 2 years prior, they made an extraordinary effort to replace their lost and outdated artillery pieces, even going as far as to melt down church bells for material. The new Russian artillery corps was quite effective. The Swedish garrison of Nöteborg, although mounting a serious defense, was forced to surrender after heavy bombardment and continuous assaults. The Swedish commander gave Peter the key to the city, which symbolized that Nöteborg was the key to the Neva River. Peter, recognizing that as well, renamed the city to Schlisselburg and placed it under the command of his most trusted general, Menshikov. The siege, though relatively short, left the Russian army exhausted, and the Tsar's desire to repair and improve the fort gave them some time to recover. Charles was aware of the situation in the north. However, he did not see the Russian advances as a significant threat and continued pursuing his goals in Poland.
Which makes sense. He's already there. He's got a decent foothold there. If he goes to deal with the Russians, then that's going to let Augustus take back what Charles has already conquered. Better to keep hounding Augustus and get him out of the war completely, because he's got Augustus reeling. He got him running hither and thither. Yeah, makes sense for him to stay there.
As the campaigning season of 1703 began, the Russian army left Schlisselburg and advanced towards the mouth of the river Neva. The mouth of the river was guarded by a fort called Nienkens. Hearing that the Russian army was approaching, the Swedish garrison burned the fort to the ground. Peter the Great captured what was left of Nienkens on the 1st of May, and on the 27th decided to found a new city there, Russia's future capital, St. Petersburg. In order to build the superior city and the fortresses around it, tens of thousands of serfs were forcefully brought to St. Petersburg. Along with them, Peter also invited many architects, engineers and shipwrights from Western Europe to help him build the city of his dreams.
Okay, so this is the origin of St. Petersburg. If you look at this island with a fort on it, That's the Peter and Paul Fortress. It sits right off the mainland. It's on a little island. And that is, what is it? Petropavlovskaya, I believe is the actual Russian name. Something really close to that. But it's where a lot of the czars were buried, or interred, I guess you could say. You got the fortress there, but you've also got like a cathedral in there, and the tombs of some of the czars are there. This is right across from where they're going to build the Winter Palace, and there will be bridges connecting this to the mainland. Pretty iconic place. I've been to the Peter and Paul Fortress. It's pretty impressive.
These extraordinary efforts seem to have paid off, as by 1704, St. Petersburg began sprawling outwards from the main fortress, and 2 new fortresses were built alongside it. There were several Swedish attempts at reconquering the city in the next few years, however all of them were unsuccessful. Back in Poland, Charles managed to obtain the support of enough of the Polish nobility to have Stanisław Leszczyński crowned as the new king. On the other hand, Augustus still mounted a significant resistance, as he controlled the majority of the Polish army. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth subsequently descended into chaos, as the Sandomierz Confederation, led by Augustus, and the Warsaw Confederation, led by Stanisław, began fighting a brutal civil war.
Alright, this was inevitable. We saw this coming. We had to see this coming. Again, Augustus II is a Saxon king. He's also the elected king of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Well, he's been replaced. And now you've got basically 2 kings. One of them who's probably technically no longer king, but he got the army. So we're going to have a civil war going on while Sweden is right in the middle of it. And this is really what seals the deal for the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. They mentioned this in the last video. That battle that they were talking about before was the beginning. This is kind of the next step. Now we're going into full-on civil war.
Due to the chaotic nature of the conflict, forts and cities continuously changed hands between the 2 confederations and Sweden, and it's difficult to discern who controlled several parts of the Commonwealth at.
I was struggling to remember the name of that battle. I am not good at that kind of thing typically.
Different points in time. In the summer of 1704, the Swedish fort of Narva fell to the Russian army after a much more effective blockade and siege than 4 years earlier. It was at Narva that Peter signed a treaty with Augustus, granting the Saxon monarch significant subsidies, 12,000 Russian soldiers, and lands in Ruthenia in exchange for staying in the war. Over the next year, the Russians and Saxons had devised a strategy to defeat the Swedish army and expel Charles from Poland. The Grodno campaign, as it later became known, aimed to capture the Swedish forces in a pincer movement with a 3-sided offensive from Lithuania, Ruthenia and Saxony. Charles was not sitting idly either, and by the summer of 1705, he had convinced the Diet in Warsaw to start working on a peace treaty and to crown Stanisław as king. As what was going on in Warsaw was seen as a possible catastrophe for Augustus's war effort, not to mention the fact that it represented a significant hit to his pride, he knew that he had to act quickly. A large Saxon cavalry force was sent to assault Warsaw and to stop the coronation of Stanisław. Augustus's reckless endeavour ended in a complete disaster, as the force was defeated by a much smaller Swedish army and its commander was captured. Furthermore, the Saxon commander also divulged the strategic intentions of Augustus and his allies, allowing the Swedes to thoroughly prepare for the upcoming Grodno campaign, as the majority of Livonia and Estonia were under Russian control by the beginning of the campaign. The main Russian army, along with large Saxon and Polish-Lithuanian contingents, set up for winter quarters at the fort of Grodno in Ruthenia. They expected a quick victory over the Swedish army after the campaigning season of 1706 began. However, they did not even get the chance to try. Much like his predecessor, Gustavus Adolphus, Charles force marched his army in the dead of winter and arrived at Grodno on the 24th of January. Lacking the artillery to assault the fort, Charles opted to cross the frozen Neman River and blockade the city. Seeing that the young king was preparing to encircle them, Augustus immediately left with 5,000 men, hoping to reinforce his army in Saxony. Peter, unwilling to bring the rest of his army to relieve the siege, ordered Menshikov to leave the fort with the cavalry as soon as possible. Grodno fell in April, and the Russians lost more than a third of their initial force. They would have lost even more had Charles not misjudged the direction of Menshikov's retreat. Unable to pursue the Russian army through the thick marshlands of Silesia, Charles went westwards to seek a battle with the Saxons. As Charles was busy with the siege, Augustus had prepared to advance towards Warsaw. He led a 7,000-strong cavalry force, while the main body of the Saxon-Polish army was commanded by Schlisselburg. A third Saxon army under Brauser was also advancing from Kraków. Schlisselburg crossed the Oder on the 8th of February and advanced towards the town of Sława in Silesia. While this was taking place, Rehnskiöld was resting in his winter quarters, which extended from Kostin to the border with Brandenburg. No sooner had he learned of the Saxon advance, he assembled his army and began marching towards the Oder. After discovering the movements of both Schlisselburg and Brauser, Rehnskiöld deduced that the two of them planned to avoid open battle with him and join forces at Poznan. To avoid any surprises, the Swedish commander retreated the same way from which he came, and made sure to spread the word at every town and village that he was retreating, and hoping to avoid open battle.
Oh no. I don't know the details of this, but my guess is that this is a deception move. If he's spreading the word, he's wanting them to believe that, or he's planning something.
Rehnskiold's information warfare proved successful, as Schlisselburg gave credit to the rumors of a Swedish retreat and decided to pursue the Swedish army instead of advancing towards Poznan. The Saxon general believed that the mere presence of his superior army would be enough to rout the Swedish force. With this strategy, Rehnskiöld achieved two things. He drew Schlisselburg's army away from any allied forces, and was able to choose a site of battle that was optimal for the Swedish army's size and composition. Upon both armies reaching the Fraustadt on the 13th of February, Rehnskiöld started arraying his army in battle formation. It was at this point that Schlisselburg realized that he had been deceived. However, he had to give battle, as it would have been scandalous for him to retreat with such a superior force. The Saxon force was around 20,000 strong, with around 10,000 Saxon and 6,000 Russian infantry, and 4,000 Saxon cavalrymen. Schlisselburg assembled his infantry into two columns, between the villages of Jägersdorf and Roosdorf, and in front of it he placed 31 cannons, 44 mortars, and a chevaux de frise. 2,000 Saxon horsemen were placed on either wing. Rehnskiöld had only 9,400 men at his disposal, with 3,700 infantry and 5,700 cavalry. He placed his cavalry on the flanks, and the majority of his infantry in a single line in the center, while some Karelians were also mixed in among the cavalry. Axel Sparre commanded the infantry in the center, while Hummerhjelm led the left, and Rehnskiöld himself was in charge of the right. As the Swedish army advanced, the Saxons waited until their enemies were at about 100 paces distance. Then they fired all of their cannons and mortars. Although the Swedish army suffered some casualties during this barrage, they did not give the Saxons enough time for another one, as the center and left started their charge. The Swedish center's advance was at first checked by the chevaux de frise. However, after less than 15 minutes, the Swedish forces broke through. The Swedes, who were expertly trained at hand-to-hand combat, charged their Saxon counterparts with swords and did not fire a single shot. In spite of being under constant fire, the ferocious Karelian onslaught forced the Saxons to retreat towards the village of Bezen. The Swedish wings had even more success, as the numerically inferior Saxon cavalry began fleeing after just several minutes of fighting. Only a handful of cavalry on the Saxon right, led by Colonel Kospot, mounted a desperate defense. However, they were surrounded and broken after the rest of their wing fell. The Swedish right afterwards came upon the 6,000 Russian soldiers. The Russians had their uniforms turned inside out, as Schlisselburg knew that they were inexperienced and Rehnskiöld would target them. Their weakness was revealed though. The Russians fired only one volley at the Swedes before throwing down their arms and retreating behind the wall of spikes. After removing the chevaux de frise there, Rehnskiöld chased down the entire Russian force and massacred them all. As all of the Saxon cavalry had fled, their Swedish counterparts were now free to surround the remainder of the army on all sides. Much like Hannibal almost 2 millennia before him, Rehnskiöld executed a double envelopment perfectly, forcing the remainder of the Saxon army to surrender. And with that, the entire Saxon army, raised with so much toil, care and expense, and which was twice the size of the Swedish army, had been defeated in less than an hour's time. The Saxons lost more than 7,000 men during the battle itself, and had almost all of the rest imprisoned, with the total losses amounting to about 15,000 to 16,000.
Jeez.
The Swedes lost around 400 men, and also had around 1,000 men injured.
Crazy that the Swedes are able to pull all this off. And Charles II's not even here for this one. It's just impressive what the Swedes are able to do at this time. They are obviously a very skilled, very effective military force. That or their enemies are really that incompetent. I think it's a little bit of both. But I think a lot more of it is the Swedes are just very efficient at this point. They're all going to be seasoned soldiers. A lot of the guys on the other side are going to be conscripts fighting their first battles.
Augustus's biggest problem, however, was that the road to Saxony now lay wide open and undefended. Augustus, who linked up with Brausa and had 12,000 men at his disposal, was only 80 kilometers away from Fraustadt when the battle took place. Shocked at the news of his Grand Army's complete defeat at the hands of an inferior Swedish force, Augustus hastily retreated to Kraków. Since Peter the Great was unwilling to send his army to even relieve the siege of Grodno, there wasn't any hope of Russian aid for them either. After his victory at Grodno, Charles XII turned west to prepare for the upcoming invasion of Saxony. In the next few months, Augustus desperately tried to negotiate a peace with Charles, even offering to split up the Commonwealth between himself and Stanisław. As autumn began, the Swedish armies marched into Saxony and quickly occupied Leipzig. Without any other options, Augustus agreed to all Swedish demands and signed the Treaty of Altranstädt. According to the treaty, he would renounce all of his claims to the Polish and Lithuanian crowns, annul treaties with Russia, and extradite the Swedish traitor Johan Patkull. In order to humiliate his personal enemy, Charles also forced Augustus to congratulate Stanisław on his victory and coronation. In only 6 years, the young and capable Charles XII eliminated 2 of his 3 enemies. The time had finally come that he would turn his attention to Russia. The Great Northern War was entering its most critical stage. Our series will continue in the coming weeks, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing. It helps immensely.
Yeah, please do that. Please head over there and show these guys some support. If you made it this far, you obviously are enjoying this. So let's show these guys some support. They definitely deserve it. We will be back tomorrow with the next part of this, as well as another side feature for leading into the Cold War this coming weekend. I hope you're enjoying this week. I hope there's a little bit of something for everybody. Anyway, I'll see you all next time. Until then, bye-bye.